For this video, I am going to discuss the part 2 of our chapter 2. So our part 2 will include the other measure of economic growth, which is GNP or the gross national product. So we are going to compare GDP and GNP. And also, I am going to discuss double counting and how to avoid double counting. Gross National Product or GNP serves as an alternative measure of economic output. While GDP represents the most commonly used measure of an economy's output, sometimes economists use an alternative measure, which is GNP. So GNP is the total value of final goods and services produced during a particular period with factors of production owned by the residents of a particular country. So let us differentiate GDP from GNP as an alternative measure of output. So to compare GDP from GNP, GDP is the total value of final goods and services produced during a given period within the geographic boundaries of a country, regardless of by whom it is produced. The goods and services are produced domestically. So GDP, it counts all of the goods and services produced domestically. So lahat ng na-produce sa loob ng bansa na yun, no, within that border or boundaries, that will be part of the GDP of that country. Regardless kung anong nationality or anong foreign nationality ang may-ari nung business, no, but still nag-ooperate dun sa country or nagpo-produce dun sa country na yun, that will be considered as the GDP of that country. So later, we will give an example. While GNP is the total value of final goods and services produced during a given period by the citizens of a country, no matter where they live. Okay? So all of the products, goods, and services produced by the citizen of a country, kahit saan sila nakatira, that will be part of the GNP of a certain country. The goods and services are produced by the nationals of the country. So, yun ang tatandaan natin, ano? Pag GDP, all of the goods and services produced domestically will be counted as the GDP of that country. Pag GNP, no? All of the goods and services produced by the citizens of a country, regardless kung saan sila nakatira, no? Or it is produced by the nationals of that country, that will be part of their GNP. So here are another distinctions between GDP and GNP for you to better understand the difference between the two. So GDP considers more on location. So again, all of the goods and services produced domestically will be considered in the GNP. So all income generated within a country regardless of producer nationality. Okay? Regardless of producer nationality. Basta lahat po ng value or income generated within that country, that will be considered as its GDP. It also excludes income from investments in other countries, since ang focus natin is domestic location. So any investments to other countries, any income from that investments will not be included in our GDP. So we have GNP, it considers more on nationality, okay, regardless of location. So all income generated by a country's residents regardless of resident location. So kahit saan pa nakatira yung kanilang residents, all income generated by their residents or nationals will be counted as part of their GNP. So it excludes income generated by foreign producers within countries' borders. So since ang kinoconsider nila, no, ay yung income or output of all of their nationals, they will exclude or hindi nila isasama ang any income generated by foreign producers. So their focus is on their nationals or citizens. So these are the common distinctions of GDP and GNP. So example, a resident of Bellingham, Washington. So saan ba yung Bellingham, Washington? So it is in the US. It owns and operates a watch repair shop across the Canadian-US border in Victoria, British Columbia. So the value of watch repair services produced at the shop would be counted as part of the Canada's GDP because they are produced in Canada. Okay? So they are produced in Canada. So they will be part of the Canada's GDP. Okay? Kahit na resident ng Bellingham, Washington, no, ang nagmamay-ari at nag-ooperate ng watch repair shop na yon. Okay? That value would not be part of the US GDP. But because the watch repair services were produced using capital and labor provided by a resident of the United States, they will be counted as part of the GNP of the US, but not as part of the GNP in Canada. So since a resident of Bellingham, Washington, no, so it is an American, no, a citizen of the United States, okay? It uses capital and labor by a resident of the US, that will be part of the GNP of the US, not as GNP of Canada. Okay? It will be part of the Canada's GDP, but the GNP, it will be the GNP of the United States. Okay? And next, we have the concept of double counting. So when we say double counting, it means counting of the value of the same product more than once. So ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo before on our previous video, that GDP somehow, there are gaps in using GDP as measurement. So sometimes there are tendency na na-overestimate or na-underestimate ang value or the monetary value of goods and services. So, ito yung reason because there are tendency na nadodoble yung count ng value ng same product. No? Kaya tinawag na double counting. So, it will become a problem because, yun nga, sabi ko nga, pwedeng ma-overestimate or ma-underestimate yung ating GDP. Okay? Doon tayo nagre-rely sa GDP. Economists and statisticians rely for decision-making for GDP. So if GDP is not that 100% accurate, no? So sometimes nangyayari na no-overestimate siya or hindi naiiwasan na nadodoble, no, yung bilang ng same product. No? So may tendency na maging iba yung ating implication for the GDP or yung ating interpretation for our GDP. So, gaya ng example ko before, increasing GDP does not always necessarily mean na nag-i-increase din ang standard of living ng tao or talaga bang nag-i-increase or nagkakaroon ng economic growth. So, it does not always the case. No? Na kapag nag-i-increase ang GDP, ay positive ang mga susunod na interpretations. So, yun po yung tinatawag nating double counting or the issue of double counting. So, ngayon, the question is, how are we going to avoid double counting? So, according to output method of calculating national income, the value of final goods and services produced by all the production units of a country during a year should be counted. So, according to the output method, nakabase lang sa output yung pagko-compute ng value ng final goods. So, only final goods and services produced by the country during a year should be counted. No? Final goods. In other words, the value of intermediate goods which enter into final goods should not be taken into account. So that is according to the output method of calculating national income. Okay? So lahat lang ng value ng final goods, ibig sabihin yung tapos na. Okay? So hindi kasama yung intermediate goods na ginagamit to produce into final goods. Example, paper in printing of books, raw cotton used in garments, wet used in making bread, etc. Okay? So, hindi siya tinitake into account in the output method of calculating national income. But in actual practice, ito yung nangyayari. They take the value of final goods. Also, the value of intermediate goods gets included because there are producers or sellers which treat their commodity as final product. So, hindi na nila kinoconsider kung yung pinoproduce or yung binibenta nila is gagamitin ba to ng consumer or ng customer as final good or intermediate good. So, may tendency na sinasama nila or binibilang nila, no? So, nadodoble yung bilang. Kasi, yung intermediate good, pag na-convert siya into finished good at naibilang na siya sa intermediate good, ibibilang ulit siya sa final good. So, may tendency po na ganun, na nadodoble yung bilang. Okay? So, example nga nun, kapag ka-tinrit ni seller or ni producer na final good yung kanyang binibenta or pinoproduce. So, for example, while taking value of the final goods like cycles, the value of tires, tubes, frames, bells, etc., no, which are intermediate good, used in manufacturing these cycles also gets included inadvertently. So, may instance po na gano'n, ano? Na kinuha na yung value, no, ng intermediate goods, and then, pagka naging final good na siya, yung nag-produce ng final good, sinasama din niya sa bilang yung value ng intermediate goods. Okay? Or nasasama sa computation ng final price niya yung value ng intermediate goods na ginamit niya. So, may tendency po na nadodoble talaga yung bilang ng value ng good and services because of the intermediate goods. Okay? So, ito yung definition ng intermediate goods if you are confused. So, intermediate goods are unfinished goods or goods used as inputs in the production of a more final product. So, ito yung mga goods na mag-undergo pa ulit siya ng process to produce a final good. So, example nga po, ano, yung lead po na gagamitin, no, is an intermediate good to produce wooden pencils. Okay? Or example nga po, yung gulong, no, yung tubes, yung frames, yung bells, etc. na ginagamit to produce a vehicle or a car, those are intermediate goods. So to avoid this problem of double counting, which would overstate the size of the economy, government statisticians just count the value of final goods and services in the chain of production. So to solve the issue, no, they just count the value of final goods and services at the end of the chain of production. So intermediate goods are excluded from GDP calculations since the value captured in the final products at the end of the production chain are being considered. But double counting is perfectly solved by value-added method. So value-added method, instead of taking value of final products, value added by each firm at each stage of production is included. Okay, so under value-added method, the value added at each stage of production, yun lang po ang kino-consider. Okay? So, kaya tinawag na value added. Kung ano yung value na na-add doon sa kada stage ng production, yun ang kino-consider na bilang or nag-a-add up lang siya. Okay? So, later may example tayo. So, in other words, the cost of intermediate goods or raw material used by a firm in making a product is excluded and only the value added at each stage of production by every producing enterprise is included. Okay, so to get the value added, you just simply subtract the value of inputs from the value of output of a firm. So example. So here is the example. So we have here transaction, value of output, value of inputs, and the value added. So dito natin makikita no, yung impact ng value added method. So again, under value added method, all those value na na-add no, all throughout the production are being considered. So let's move here on the first column, which is transaction. So let's assume that A, B, C, and D are different businesses. A has a different business from B to C and to D. A will serve as the first step or first phase of the chain of production. Ibig sabihin, let's assume na siya yung nagbebenta ng pinaka-raw material. Okay? Pinaka-raw material or intermediate good. Okay? Then si D, siya yung magpo-produce ng final good na later on na ibebenta niya kay consumers. No? So, yung dadaanan na proseso from A hanggang kay D, yun po yung tinatawag nating chain of production. Okay? Unless hindi pa final good, no? Yung direct na ibebenta kay consumers. So, dadaan muna siya sa chain of production or sa proseso. Okay? To become a final good. So, let's interpret this figure or image. No? So here, on the second column naman, we have the value of output. Then, we have the value of input on the third column. So again, to get the value added, we just simply subtract the value of input to the value of output. So magkano ba yung ipinasok niya or yung input niya na capital, okay, or material. Then, nag-undergo ng process yung input niya. Magkano na ngayon yung value ng output niya, yung pinroduce niya. Okay? So, para makuha natin yung nadagdag na value at every process. So, unahin natin yung first transaction, which is A sells to B. So, si A, nagbenta kay B. Okay? Nagbenta siya ng raw material na halagang 1,000. Okay? So, 1,000 yung nadagdag na value. Si B, no? So, bumili siya kay A, ano? Bumili siya kay A ng halagang 1,000, so yun yung input niya, no? Yung input ni B. So, nag-undergo si B ngayon, no? Ng process, halimbawa, yung raw material niya, kinonvert niya into another product ulit, no? Na siya niyang ibebenta kay C, ang halaga na ngayon is 1,500. So, yung input niya na 1,000 ay naging 1,500. So, nadagdagan ng value na 500. So, kung magkano lang inadagdag out of the initial value added, that will be the value added here. Okay, yun lang inadagdag. Para hindi nadodoble yung bilang. Kasi kung 1,500 din yan, magiging 1,500 tong value added. Ibig sabihin, madodoble or nadoble yung bilang. Okay? Or naisama na naman yung value ng intermediate good na naunang i-consider kanina. Okay? Next. So, si C, yung binili niya kay D, na halagang 1,500. So, ito yun. Input niya yun. Yun ay input niya. So, nag-undergo ulit ng process si C. Kinonvert niya ulit yung binili niya kay D into another product. No? Kinodify niya yung product na siya niyang ibibenta kay D. So, ang value na from 1,500, okay, ang presyo na niya or yung total output ay 2,200. So, magkano yung nadagdag? So, 700. No? So, ito lang yung nadagdag. No? So, hindi na natin i-consider yung buong 2,2 kasi, again, madodoble po yung bilang. Okay? Next, si D, na bumili kay C. Okay? Kung meron pa siyang proseso na pagdadaanan para mag-produce yung kanyang final good, no? So, ang input niya ay 2,200. No? To produce the final good, no? Na ang value na ngayon ay 3,500. Okay? So, magkano yung difference kay 22 tsaka kay 35? That will be 13. No? So, nadagdagan ng additional value na 13, no? Yung pagkakaproduce ni D from 2,200 na input niya, naging 3,500 yung value ng output niya. Nadagdagan siya ng value na 1,300. Okay? So, yun po yung process ng value-added method. And then, just simply add yung mga na-add na value out of the chain of production. Yung mga nadagdag at every step of production. So, we have 1,000, 500, 700, and 1,300. The total is 3,500. So, ang total na na-add na value ay 3,500. Okay? So, through this, naiiwasan natin yung double counting because we just only consider the value added at each step or phase of production. Okay?